Hey everybody, this is Bad at Keeping Secrets. I'm Carissa, and today I have Whitney Goodman with me. She's I don't know, the person behind Sit with Wit, the wildly popular Instagram account, and she wrote the book Toxic Positivity. She also has a Substack, and are you the founder of the Collaborative Counseling Center?
Yes, that's my private practice.
Is that in Miami? You're based in Miami, right?
So I moved recently to St. Pete, Florida, and now I am totally virtual. Since the start of the pandemic, I closed my office.
Oh, amazing. I don't know how I have lots of questions in that vein, but I'm going to try to stick to. Do you mind talking? Can we start out? I really love to hear about how people sort of got into the disciplines that they chose and early exposure, because I think that for me, I never understood growing up the sort of correlation between what I was exposed to and then what I ended up doing.
Yeah, I've always had an interest in talking to people, learning how they think. Like I think as a child, I was very much like an observer and also an over advice giver. So trying to find ways to parlay that into a career. But as I got older, I went to therapy myself when I was like a teenager. I was having anxiety and panic attacks, and I knew I wanted to do something where I could help people, and ended up going into grad school straight out of undergrad. So this has really been my career, for my entire life since I graduated from college.
I think it's interesting. I think you start in the beginning of the book talking about you studied therapy to become a therapist to give people advice, but then what was the
Yeah.
sort of reality of actually being a therapist for you?
There's no advice giving. And honestly, I don't even want to give advice anymore. I think I get that outlet some through my writing because I'm more talking in just this general perspective. But when I'm sitting with a client, I'm more trying to understand why they do what they do and how I can ask them the right questions so that they're able to end up at their own conclusion rather than telling them what to do.
I think that's been a huge shift for me when trying to be a support person for the people I love in my life, trying to figure out the right questions, or not even the right questions, but the questions that would be helpful in the moment for exploring kind of what's going on and why they're doing the things that they're doing. But I think it's interesting, like, is there a history of therapists or psychology or writers in your family?
0%. I think
Really?
it was no, very off the beaten path of a career choice as far as my family goes. And I think some of them maybe were a little bit resistant even to me going into this field, just because I definitely was not hesitant about applying things I was learning to my own family. I'm not very quiet when it comes to that. So it was certainly not a family career path.
This reminds me of, in your bio, I think you refer to yourself as a radically honest um, psychotherapist. And I was wondering if you could maybe define what radically honest means, because I think that when I think about radical honesty, I think about the movie Liar Liar, or like all of these like sort of pop culture references, like what would happen if people said exactly what was on their minds. But I think that's not the whole picture.
Yeah, and that's not really how I honesty in therapy. I think about calling things out for what they are and really coming at it from this lens of like acceptance and honesty and reality. I noticed that a lot of the therapists I was interacting with and going to were very like soft and sort of tiptoeing around everything. And I wanted to have a more like direct approach. And that's how I saw that coming to be.
Would you say, throughout your writing and throughout Toxic Positivity, the book, I think for me, a value that I'm finding that potentially I'm placing on you is the location of reality and what reality is. And I was wondering if you could kind of define why reality might be important to locate, or why it's a value, if it is a value of yours.
It is a value of mine. I think it's such a point of suffering for people, myself included, that we want to either deny what's actually happening. We want to live in this alternate future. We're thinking about a past that we think happened or didn't happen. And instead of really being able to just sit with what is and accept it, we get stuck in all these other places. And I find that that brings a lot of suffering.
So I guess let's start off with maybe if you could define what toxic positivity is for those of you out there who maybe are new to the term. Did you coin the term? I'm sorry, I didn't look up the
Yeah,
etymology of it.
I am the first person to use it like publicly, as far as I know, but I'm not sure if there was any other place where the term can be found prior to that.
That's cool. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. So for me, toxic positivity is this unrelenting pressure to be happy all the time, no matter what the circumstances. And it's ultimately something that we use on ourselves and with other people.
So I guess I think the sort of something that was really interesting to me that you talked about in the beginning of the book was sort of the history of the positivity movement in the United States, and it being in some ways a reaction to sort of fundamental Calvinist views.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if you could kind of go through a little bit of how you see the history of the positivity movement. Can I say it that way?
Yeah, yeah.
Starting back sort of or starting back when sorry, I'm totally blanking on the term.
That's okay.
Starting back during when the founders of the New World, came.
Yeah, so if you trace back sort of the history of the United States, we are built on the right to pursue happiness, right? And everything was revolving around happiness. And a lot of this was in response to Calvinism, which was the prevailing religion at the time. If you look into Calvinism, it's very dark. It's like you're kind of doomed to your fate. There's nothing you can do to protect yourself. And I think the founding fathers, the powers that be, were noticing like, wow, it's pretty hard to get people motivated with this rhetoric. So we need to find something new. And that's when we see this discussion of like, God wants you to be happy and wealthy and successful. And we start to see the power of positive thinking come out through like Norman Vincent Peale, other authors like that, who introduced positivity in a really like religious framework. And a lot of positive thinking was tied to religion until it started to really move into like work and wealth and success. And that's more what we see of it today.
Can you talk about what it looks like, or what that transition was, and potentially some theories on why? And yeah, because I definitely feel like there's a huge pressure to be positive in the workplace. I'm not practicing in any particular faith, and so I think that that's sort of where it kind of got me, or it really resonated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's always been this prevailing ideology, right? That if you're going to be successful, you have to be positive. And I think so many of us know people that are incredibly negative who have also been quite successful, financially or whatever it is. And it's, to me, a way to keep people in line in the workforce, to kind of make people submissive, to not get a lot of challenging beliefs. And a lot of the studies that I read about positive thinking in the workforce actually found that when you don't have negativity, creativity really suffers. And we need to have these challenges and sort of like challenges to viewpoints in the workplace in order to move forward. And it's something that's so discouraged.
So going back to sort of the fundamental definition of toxic positivity, I mean, we have this idea that like, oh, if we just think positive, if we do right, I think you use the term the just world bias, I think,
Yeah.
later in the book. Can you talk about what that is, and if people aren't familiar with the bias, and how it can serve you but also really let you down at the same time?
So the just world bias is that good things happen to good people, right? And bad things happen to bad people. And we sort of assume and get indoctrinated with this belief that if I do everything right, good things will come to me. And that's a lot of the rhetoric you hear about people who get sick, right? Let's say you have cancer. Oh, well, if you think positive, you'll live. If you think positive, the treatment will work. And when it doesn't go that way, we do a lot of mental gymnastics to try to figure out why that specific thing happened to that person in order to fit it into this bias that we have about the world. And that can be really tricky because it causes us a lot of mental suffering if we're on the receiving end of some of those bad outcomes. And I've seen this a lot in my office where people come in kind of wondering, like, what did I do to make this happen to me? What did I do wrong?
And then how do you kind of, I mean, I think for me, it's like, I don't know why it's so difficult to accept that like hard things happen to everyone. You can do
Yeah.
everything right. And we live in sort of, at least in my worldview, a sort of meaningless random universe. And
Mhm.
it's really intoxicating to think that we could somehow control it. By thinking that, oh, if we just do the right things. This also goes back to what I think you were saying earlier about using positivity as a way to sort of not enforce submission but like make sure people follow the sort of guidelines and not question things. I think for me, I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit. There's a section in the book too about how, I know we just talked about how this is sort of divergent from religion, but also how therapy and religion aren't actually at odds with each other.
There's a lot of great data on how religion and mental health can actually work together to improve people's outcomes. And ultimately, what we find is that when people feel supported, understood, welcomed, taken care of, religion is a really great life force for people. The problem arises when religion is being used to make people feel badly about themselves, or to make them feel inferior, or to even like cast them aside because they're not fitting in with a particular like dogma or set of rules.
I think that there's one, I think the story that can you tell the story about the client that you had? I think their name was Alex, who came to you and who was really worried about telling their parents that they were in therapy, and how you kind of approached that.
Yeah, so this was a perfect example of a client that was sort of figuring out their sexuality and what that meant to them, and also how they could integrate their religion and their faith into their life while figuring out their identity. And I think this is something unique that you can work on in therapy, is deciding, what does my faith mean to me, along with all these other parts of myself and all these other identities that I have. And I don't think anything should ever cancel out or restrict all those other identities. And what I ultimately did with this client was try to help them find a way that they can utilize their faith to build them up and to feel better about themselves without denying these other parts of them.
I think a lot about authenticity, and I think that this sort of tangentially relates to. I was wondering if you could talk about the value in authenticity, and also experiencing negative emotions along with, or I mean, I guess a wide gamut of emotions.
Yeah. Authenticity has become such a buzzword lately. I feel like on social media that we're all
Yeah.
trying to learn how to be our authentic selves. And to me, that means really just figuring out again all those parts of you and who you are, what you're made up of. And that also means those parts that are hard, which includes negative emotions, right? Or the things that feel distressing to us, and allowing us to experience all of those emotions, which is the opposite, I think, of what most positive thinking teaches us to do.
I mean, this might be obvious, and I'm a person who spends. I would say I'm attracted to. I think you spoke in the book about being sort of classified as babies, as either happy, good babies, or
Mhm.
like I had colic, and so I was a difficult child, and I think even going back to then, it's interesting to think about how labeling might have manifested. But okay, I think of myself as a person who enjoys and finds the hard feelings interesting, but for those people um, who don't have that same sort of curiosity, can you talk about maybe the value of moving, exploring the sort of more tricky feelings that might come up?
Yeah, I'm with you. I like love listening to sad music and feeling that kind of way. But for people that aren't comfortable with that, I find it's because they don't have a lot of experience with it. And so it feels like I'm going to get stuck in this feeling if I let myself go there. And I would encourage people just to practice and realize that you can get through it and know that that's like the core of being human, right? Is being able to have all these different types of emotional experiences. And that's what's ultimately going to make you a better leader, a better partner, kinder to yourself, is the ability to ride out those more challenging feelings.
Can you talk a little bit about the sort of signs, maybe growing up in households that there were potentially that you were learning to suppress your emotions through the sort of culture that you were raised in?
Yeah, if you grow up in a home with a lot of toxic positivity, I think that's an ultimate form of emotional suppression in the name of always being happy. So people may be encouraging you to just move on, get over things, look on the bright side, always smile. Any complaint, criticism, or discomfort is met with like some type of positive side to the coin, right? We also see families where happy, quote unquote, emotions are really hard for people to deal with. And so maybe that family system leans more towards like melancholy, sadness, or even anger. And that's the only feeling that's allowed to be expressed. So if you notice that you grew up in a system where anybody was telling you you shouldn't feel that way, that feeling is wrong, not to express that certain emotion, or you didn't see them express anything else, that's a pretty big sign that there wasn't a lot of emotional intelligence in the home, or maybe a lot of emotional awareness.
I think the sort of counter, and I don't know if you've gotten this before, I'm sure you have, the sort of counter argument to that of like it teaching you how to manage your emotions
Mhm.
by masking them. And I was wondering, what do you say to that when people say like, oh, it's important to sort of um, I don't know, play the role of being fine or
Yeah.
steadfast or strong, even when the sort of dissonance of your body's actions might be in conflict with what you're saying.
So I actually think that can be a really good skill and it can help you in a lot of places, right? Like if you're going to be in the military or you're going to be an ER doctor or whatever it is, you need to learn how to suppress and compartmentalize in moments. And growing up in chaotic family systems can give you that type of skill set. Problems arise when we do that all the time in every situation. So if you're somebody that needs to do that at work or in other places, you need to have other outlets to process your emotions. And I think that's the problem with the family being like that, because that should be the one place where you can express yourself. And maybe you do need to compartmentalize and learn how to be that way at school or in other places.
But so I think a term that I think when I feel a lot of sort of shame around being negative or being sort of drawn to sort of more difficult emotions. And I was wondering if you could talk about those sort of I think that's like a main feeling or association when someone is overly positive, when what I'm needing actually is a little bit more of like hand holding or just existing and
Yeah.
acceptance.
It's funny, right? Because being called negative has become like one of the ultimate insults, right? Like nobody wants to be deemed a negative person, when in reality, I don't really believe in like negative people. I think they're just people that are struggling, going through different times in their life, don't have their needs met, need more understanding. And so when you're in that place, instead of labeling yourself as negative, I think it's better to approach it from this perspective of like, what do I need right now? What am I looking for? What do I want? And I will move out of this. This isn't something that identifies who I am as a whole.
You have a section, I think, in the book about how to complain effectively. And I was wondering if you could maybe explain, well, what effective complaining looks like, and B, how to do it. I think I listened to an episode of Hidden Brain recently about, it was actually arguing against complaining. Um, I can't remember the researcher's name, but they found that like, oh, and I shouldn't summarize it. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. But I was just, I was wondering if you could talk about how, in some ways I want permission to be able to complain, and maybe you could give it to me.
Yeah, I found a lot of good reasons for complaining throughout my research, as far as like it uniting people, it telling us when there's a problem, giving you an outlet. And I find that complaining is part of the human condition. I think there are some of us that could do it a little bit less or more effectively, but for me, it's not something that's going away. So we might as well learn how to do it properly. And I relied a lot on Dr. Kowalski's research for this. And she talks a lot about how we need to identify exactly what we're complaining about and get very specific. Think about who can make that happen for us and what do we want the outcome to be. And it could just be that the problem is I don't feel heard. I really need to vent. And my mom is the best person for me to call.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, you're fine.
I have,
Go
I
ahead.
have the opposite. I think my mother, I thought a lot about the difference between venting and dumping. And maybe that plays into it, but I want to let you finish on how to, on complaining effectively.
I think that is what you're bringing up, though. That is the difference between like effective complaining and just dumping on someone, is sort of knowing what it is that you want and being able to tell that person and identify that need. So there was like a viral post going around a while ago of someone saying like, tell someone I just need to vent or I need advice before you start sharing with them, or ask them, are you in a place right now where you can listen to me vent? And I find that when we do that, it's so much more effective because everyone involved knows exactly what's going on and what's expected.
Oh my gosh, I'm absolutely going to use this. I'm also going to tell my mother about it, because I really wish she would ask me, are you in a place right now where you can listen to me vent? Because it's really difficult. I think for me, I have issues with enmeshment. And it's really difficult for me not to completely like have my entire being swept up.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
In whatever she's venting about. And I understand the cathartic, there's something beautiful about being able to just vent to somebody else. And I want to offer that space to her without making it about, I guess, me. So I think this sort of naturally transitions into like how I think another section in the book you talk about how to go about supporting people. I'm sorry, it's raining here.
You're fine.
I don't know if you can hear it, but it's really intense. We're in this like crazy atmospheric river at the moment.
Oh wow.
In California. But Florida you have your own.
Yes, it's been beautiful lately, so I'll take it.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I think I wanted why is it important, or why do we want to be a good support to people, or why do we care, I guess, is the first sort of entry. And then I kind of would love to talk through different strategies to become, again, a better support system, or just like I think there's such a disconnect for me in how I would intuitively support someone and how they need to be supported by me. And I think it's difficult to sort of balance and manage those two things.
The quality of our relationships is one of the best identifiers or signifiers of how well our life is going to go, right? And so I think learning how to support each other properly has benefits for us as the support person. And it's also going to help us get support back. It comes back to that thing we were just talking about, how when we both know what's going on, what to expect, what we can get from the other person, it tends to go a lot better. And that's ultimately why I wrote this book, is that I found I was getting the same complaint over and over from people that came into my office about, I just want people to listen. I just want people to tell me like it sucks. I just want them to be with me in it. And I was hearing this complaint like literally 20 times a week from people in all their different types of relationships. And so I started wondering, like, what is it that's making it so hard for us to just sit with people? And I genuinely think it's because we just don't know how. We weren't taught, no one did it for us. And that once we learn that we have those skills, it becomes much easier to ride out the rain, with someone while they're distressed.
I think also too, I mean, again, it's hard to, again, make it about the person who's listening or supporting, but it is uncomfortable to sit
It's so
with
uncomfortable.
reality, and to also sit with someone else that you love in a difficult reality. So I think it makes sense as a coping skill for the supporter also to offer some platitude about the bright side of things. Because
100%.
it's very satisfying for the supporter, but not necessarily supportive in the way that
Yeah.
it's actually being received. So can we talk about a little bit about what potentially supporting people more, not to use the word that we used earlier, effectively might actually look like in real time and instances?
Mhm. So, of course, active listening is so important, right? Nodding, showing that you're listening, making eye contact, putting your phone away, um, seeking understanding through asking questions, trying to get to know how the person is feeling. What I find is that with positivity, it's often like a very simple solution for a complicated problem that you know nothing about. And so if you go in really quick with the advice or the positive outlook, the other person starts to feel like, okay, you didn't even hear what I'm feeling or what's going on with me. So, how can we just ask people, okay, what was that like for you? What are you most worried about? What are you afraid is going to happen? And just let them talk. Even asking them, what can I do to be most helpful? Do you want me to just listen, sit here with you? Do you want advice? And really listening to what that person is looking for.
I think ever since like 2013, I've been actively working on being a better listener. And I don't know if I've improved at all. It's really hard. I also think it's a product of, I don't mean to blame, I don't know how you feel about this, blaming my age, but it becomes even more difficult the older I get. It's weird because I'm more comfortable with sitting with difficult emotions, but I'm worse at at remembering specific events.
Mm,
And so it's like a weird transition for conversations. So after, I think one of the last sections in the book, and then because I know we're almost out of time, is about finding fulfillment in a hard world. And I think I was wondering if you could maybe talk about what fulfillment means. And I think that we might have a little bit of like differing views on it. I was curious if you could kind of unpack.
yeah. To me, fulfillment is being able to just feel satisfied with life to some degree and knowing that you can handle or will be able to handle what comes at you. That's going to be mixed in with moments of joy, happiness, comfort, discomfort, but it really just being alive to me is a type of fulfillment. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, I think lately I've been feeling this. I just finished this book on the Sunny Nihil called The Sunny Nihilist, uh,
Okay.
which was a tricky. Are you familiar with it?
I feel like I saw the cover recently, but I haven't read it.
It's relatively new. It's by an Australian journalist, and
Okay.
I think the sort of premise of the book is that sometimes nihilism, well, A, nihilism has got a bad rap, and B, that it can offer some relief in a world that tells you everything has to mean something, and the pressure of meaning becomes overwhelming.
Yes.
And so like just letting go, like, oh, I'm just a piece of sand in a giant universe and nothing matters. Like, oh, I can let go of this intense pressure to like have
Yeah.
perfect life in every way possible.
Right.
But I think for me, I'm at this point in my life where, and perhaps this is a product of the having a child and then also having a pandemic or living with a pandemic through a pandemic, however you want to say it, where it feels like there's nothing left to look forward to in life.
Yeah.
And I think that when you couple that with meaninglessness, there's like sort of it's difficult to find or to locate what fulfilling is, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't totally disagree with that. I think sometimes we're told to apply meaning to so many things that don't mean anything to us and to make those values. And that's a problem. I think we have to figure out just like what's going to mean something to me right now at this stage in my life. And if other people find value in 100 other things, those don't have to be important to me. I'm like the ultimate believer in like do certain things just good enough, like not all the way, and do the things that matter well. And so some things don't mean anything and they don't need to, and you don't need to stress yourself out finding meaning for them.
I think that this is a really good sort of segue into the last thing I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about good enough. And
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about how you started a Substack and what your sort of goals are with it? I read it, I love it.
Thank you.
But it's not a surprise that it would be. I think I was interviewing Emma Straub and she said, perfection is the death of all good things. And it was so affirming to think about just doing something good enough in a world that makes us feel like we can do everything, and that if we do everything, it won't be at the expense of other things.
Yeah, for sure. I am definitely not a perfectionist. I'm one of those people that gets an idea and just kind of like runs with it without thinking it through. And that was this Substack. I was like, okay, I just want to start writing something after I did this book. And I started with this idea that it's okay to not do everything perfect or well or all the way, especially in my field. I felt this pressure of like, if I wasn't writing for an academic institution or a big publisher, that the writing somehow didn't mean as much if it was happening on Instagram or on Substack or wherever it is. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start doing it. And it's really grown into this place where I'm talking a lot about adult family relationships. That's become a really popular topic among my readers. And I'm just seeing where it grows.
I think it's been really fascinating to me because I feel like there's this tension between the idea of family sticking through the hard things, but then also
Yeah.
at the same time knowing when to leave. And
Mhm.
it's super complicated. And I think that you do a really amazing job of sort of digging into the nuances of familial dynamics and generational dynamics, how generational ideas maybe are not aligned and in conflict with each other,
Right.
and how that creates difficulties in the relationships, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you
Uh,
for reading it. It means a lot to me.
I'm really impressed that you just started it in April, because there's a lot of content on there. And I also think it's like doing the Substack has become, it feels like it's it's my it's a joyful part of, but it's still a lot of work.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, for sure. For sure.
and I think it really shows how much dedication you have to it. I think it's
Thank
lovely. And I'm
you.
definitely going to put a link for everybody. Thank you so much, Whitney, for doing this with me and for
Yeah.
this book. I feel like this book is like a tonic to my accepting my native sense of self, or my authentic sense of self.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was really sort of, it felt I needed active strategies to sort of sit with and not shame myself for feeling negative emotions or difficult emotions, and then also move through them and just accept that no emotion is necessarily negative or positive, that it just
Right.
is. And so I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you doing the work, and congratulations on becoming a mom too.
Thank you so much.
Take care, Whitney.